Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on ethics and AI. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Robin Dudley. My first question to him: how can we ensure that AI systems are free from bias and do not perpetuate or exacerbate existing social inequalities?
Well, that really depends on how the training sets are set up and curated. The issue right now with a lot of the training sets is they're pulled from social media. We just saw Twitter's training set using Twitter as the source for its training, and of course, using social media as a source for training is going to train the AIs in those bad behaviors. And so, I think it means that we have to separate the training sets from social media and really curate the training sets far better. It may very well be that we're going to need an AI specifically trained to curate the training sets, to create the large language models that are being created to remove those underlying elements, because these LLMs are so very large that I don't think people are going to have the time or patience to do that themselves. And I'm really not sure they've got the capability, because individually, of course, we all have biases. And so having people do the curation becomes problematic depending on what their political, ethical, and social constructs are. So in the end, I think the way to do this is probably spin up an AI that is specifically trained to look for those kinds of social constructs that you want to remove, and let it do the removal, because I just don't think people are going to be able to do this effectively, both because of the size of the LLMs and because people are inherently biased themselves and will compromise the LLMs in some way, shape, or form based on those biases.
Excellent. My next question for you: what measures should be taken to protect individual privacy in an age where AI systems increasingly rely on large amount of personal data?
Well, this is a serious problem. The European Union has certainly put forth some of the strongest laws and regulations surrounding personal information. And I think they set the bar here for how something like this should be done. But even so, it's very hard to restrict how a system learns from data. The best way we have right now is to forensically go back through the LLM's training set and see if that data has been sourced or can be traced back to individuals. But given how these things are trained, the amount of individual information, while it's significant, is so diluted across these massive data sets that locating a connection to any individual person becomes problematic. And even if you locate it, because it's such a small part of the overall training set, arguing that the result is therefore compromising is compromised becomes very difficult as well. Well, we're going to have to see how this first wave of litigation works out. We've got quite a bit of litigation that's been filed in the United States to probe this particular problem, but recognize that individuals that are having the information compromised have themselves been compromised with the information that they have consumed over time. And this might be one of those dual-edged swords where we go down and try to connect ownership to elements of learning, and then suddenly find that scientists, book authors, educators, doctors are themselves compromised by the very same rules that we've created for these AIs. And so I think it's really going to require a lot of soul searching to determine if the rules surrounding intellectual property use from individuals are adequate, if they're applied to AI, or if all the rules need to be changed. Because I don't think the rules surrounding just AIs can change without affecting how we as individuals learn. We are an aggregate of the information we've consumed, just as the AIs are. And just because the AIs potentially have an audit path back to their source information, and we don't necessarily, though you could certainly look at somebody's a reading material over time, and because that's now tracked in many cases, and see what they've consumed to create the supposedly clean work that they've created, and determine that they themselves have been compromised. So this is one of those. This is going to be sticky. It's going to be difficult to really fix a problem that we have undoubtedly had before we had AI, and now it's been exacerbated by AI. The other interesting thing is we as individuals don't have a very large training set. I mean, the amount of information we consume as we go through school and become adults, and then over time as we refine our work, is vastly smaller than what a typical LLM contains. And so the kinds of compromises we may be accusing the AI of having are likely to be more pronounced with individuals. So again, this creates a real problem for people that create, in that if we create very strict rules surrounding AI, those same rules may apply to the very people that want their own intellectual property protected. And so it's going to be problematic. I don't see an easy way to do this without potentially creating more harm than good.
Thank you. My next question for you: who should be the accountable when AI system make a decision that leads to harm and unethical outcome, especially in the critical sector like healthcare or criminal justice?
Well, the typically liability flows back to whatever the cause of that liability was, and this is the same issue we've got with doctors. If a doctor makes a bad prognosis and it results in the death of a patient, only if the doctor was perceived as negligent are they typically liable. But that can depend on it can be very dependent on the jury and the court, and that's why. Doctors, at least here in the United States and many other countries, doctors carry a fairly significant insurance load to protect themselves against these kinds of lawsuits. And it does increase rather dramatically the overall cost of medical care. If we look at an AI taking the place of the doctor with the same rules applying, well, you really can't hold the AI accountable because it's not a thing yet. So then it's going to flow back through whoever the manufacturer or trainer of the AI was, and really back to how the information flowed through to make the wrong diagnosis, and whether that problem was a result of inaccurate data being submitted to the AI, which could certainly be possible. A patient leaving out a particular piece of information or a shortcoming in the instrumentation of the patient could result in a bad diagnosis, and that wouldn't be the fault of the AI creator or the creator of the LLM. That would be the fault of the implementer of the product, and it could be the fault of the patient themselves for not disclosing a particular issue. You know, when a patient goes in, for instance, and they're having a procedure and they're told not to take any other drugs or drink any alcohol, and they do one of those two things, and that results in their death. The blame then should be with the patient who violated the rules. But if that particular behavior wasn't identified, then it flows back to the doctor or the healthcare organization. I think the same issues are going to be held here. In those instances where the patient, if it's discovered where the patient is at the root cause of the problem, then the patient should be held accountable. And if not, then the problem should be analyzed, and it should be determined whether or not that the mistake was made due to a bias, due to poor training, due to poor AI implementation, or due to just inadequate information. And if it's the latter, it may be a case of no fault. I mean, if a doctor couldn't have done any better, and there's just simply a lack of information surrounding that particular illness that resulted in the death, then nobody made a mistake, and nobody therefore should be held liable for the mistake that was made. But on the other hand, if the LLM was biased, or the AI implementation was poorly done with inferior sensors or some other part of the implementation being inferior, then the entity that sold or deployed the AI improperly should be held accountable. So I think in all cases, a liability should flow after a forensic analysis of the situation occurs, and we don't do that well. Typically, we move to blame before analysis, which could be really problematic here, because you could see otherwise effective tools banned or sued into obsolescence because people reacted before the problem was fully determined. And particularly in those cases where the problem was caused because the patient misled the system, those are going to need to be identified. Otherwise, the industry will incur a significant amount of avoidable cost.
Thank you. My next question for you: should there be a global ban on the development and deployment of autonomous weapon? And if so, how can such a ban be effectively enforced?
Well, the reason I'm going to say no, there shouldn't be a ban on this is because there's no way to selectively enforce it. The difficulty you have when you have an arms race is even countries signing a treaty preventing a certain amount of advancement will hedge on the treaty and will continue to do research. We certainly saw that with nuclear weapons research. Yes, they're not doing testing anymore, at least not public testing anymore, but the research is clearly ongoing. It's just done in secret. And my view is it's probably better to have research done in the open so it can be monitored. So the first time you're aware of a problem that occurs that creates a global hazard isn't when that problem is exemplified. In other words, you raise issues during the development stage of a weapon. You don't raise the issues once the weapon is deployed and cause mass casualties, which is, I think, what's been going on with nuclear weapon research is the research has been ongoing, and we won't realize the problems until somebody actually drops one of these bombs and it does far more damage than we're expecting. The same thing with AI. I think that the best choice here is to keep weapons development testing at least relatively public. Granted, the deep analysis does need to be kept private, otherwise your enemies pick up the skills from your disclosures. But certainly the capability of the weapons should be disclosed, which is not uncommon with weapon systems. That they have to be sold and they have to be marketed, and so it's not atypical for those weapon systems to be demonstrated. And I think that should be encouraged here. So if there's a weapon system that is extremely upsetting to the world as a whole, or could result in the elimination of the human race, that it's identified before somebody deploys it in war. So I right now I don't think we could stop the research. So the best way to do this is to at least make as much of it visible as possible, and then raise issues that attempts to guide this research and at least attempts to save the weapons that are developed so they don't accidentally cause extreme harm, either when they're deployed accidentally or on purpose.
Thank you. My next question for you: how can we ensure that AI systems are transparent and their decision-making process are explainable to user, particularly in high-stake areas like finance and healthcare? And what's your closing remarks for today?
Well, so I think internal audit was a good example of a corrective mechanism that was deployed in this case to try to eliminate internal fraud. And also, it's a cautionary tale because over time, since internal audit was created, it was nerfed. Its capability was reduced because the management saw internal audit kind of like as an internal police force that they found annoying and often very embarrassing. And so they pulled resources from it. And that I think was a mistake. Internal audit needed to have the full support of government to assure that it remained strong and could do its job. But the mechanism could certainly work here, where an internal audit-like organization that is backed up with government oversight is inside these organizations that are creating these AIs and is able to provide guidance and a certain amount of limitation into the direction these AIs are taking, so that they're not developed to do harm. And so the goal here isn't necessarily to restrict the development of AI, but to make sure that if people are creating AIs that can do harm, that enough folks are aware of it so that mitigation can be put in place so any harm that's created doesn't become catastrophic. And so the way this happens, certainly companies should be encouraged to be transparent to a certain extent with the development efforts, but I think a mechanism like internal audit should be in place as an enforcement mechanism to assure that what is not visible inside companies is still held to the same rules. And we've got safety rails placed around the technology that are robust enough to prevent this technology from creating a Terminator-like outcome or causing broad harm to the environment. In the end, ethics in AI, like ethics with people, needs to have a level of enforcement that you can depend upon, and a set of rules, a set of ethical guidelines that most everyone agrees upon that you can enforce against. If those ethical guidelines vary between country and country or company and company, then you've got real problems with regard to how you set the bar. And so having a set of hard ethics that can be enforced by an internal audit-like organization and backed up by governments, I think would be the best way to assure that AI isn't hampered. But on the other hand, the potential damages that could result from mistakes or intentional creations of hostile AIs can be appropriately identified, mitigated, and in some cases prevented, so that the race is not harmed, and that the AI gets developed for the betterment of society, and doesn't raise up like nuclear energy initially was raised up as a race ending with race ending potential.
Thank you, Mr. Rob Enderle, for your continuous support for the World Talent Economic Forum. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.
Thank you. Bye.